Welcome, creators. Today we're continuing America's Hope, Trinidad and Tobago's Hope by Thomas Schuff, Chapter 28. Equal protection under the law cancels your bank loan. Why is equal protection so important? What does equal protection mean? Equal protection is defined as a constitutional guarantee wherein no person or class of people shall be denied the same equal protections of the law enjoyed by other persons and the enforcement of contracts. Remember, under the law, a corporation is treated like a person. Concealing the economic effect of stealing and counterfeiting denies equal protection. Never forget that an agreement or contract is a mutual agreement, and you cannot have mutual agreement without full disclosure. Pretend for a moment that non-bankers and bankers had equal protection under the law, and that the written bank loan agreement showed full disclosure so non-bankers could fully understand the agreement. If this were true, and the bank paid the debt it owed in obtaining the promissory note, your debt would be cancelled. Under equal protection, if the bank used your first promissory note to fund the check, would they not then have to accept a second promissory note with no interest and no lien to discharge the first one? Under equal protection under the law, if the bank recorded the first promissory note as a loan from you to the bank, would not the bank then have to repay you the principal and interest you paid them to receive its equivalent in kind? Under equal protection under the law, if the bank can create non-legal tender money and spend it, why can't we do the same? If the bank accepted money we created to issue a bank loan check, would they not then have to accept more to discharge the first alleged bank loan? So under full disclosure, what agreement did we sign and have mutual understanding of at the time of signing? Can I read that again? Under full disclosure, what agreement did we sign and have mutual understanding of at the time of signing? What gave Congress the right to deny us equal protection under the law? Are there two classes of citizens, bankers with one set of rules and non-bankers with another, so that banks can prey upon the non-bankers' wealth? If there is a bank loan agreement, we want to know what the full agreement is, or we want out of the alleged loan. If the bank cannot answer all our questions, how can there be an agreement with full disclosure and mutual consent? If we have equal protection under the law and do not have two classes of citizens, plus full disclosure in the written agreement so non-bankers can understand who provided the funds to issue the bank loan check, we would be out of debt. No one would be so stupid as to vote in politicians forcing this system on us if we understood the whole truth. No one would agree to an unconscionable contract, an unenforceable contract, or an ultra vires contract if we understood the whole truth. I can just hear an attorney saying that the bank has a license and you don't. What if we answered the attorney by asking what the intent of the founding fathers of the Constitution was? The intent was for Congress to issue gold and silver or United States notes, giving everyone equal protection. How can you redefine the intent and meaning, allowing the banks to create money and denying us equal protection, forcing us into debt just like a counterfeiter of United States notes would? Chapter 29, The Bankers' War. Amongst the nations of the world, the United States of America was unique. Our Constitution and the constitutional banking system was a threat to every monarch and government in the world. If our founding fathers were successful, every citizen in every country would overthrow the monarchs and bankers and join America in claiming their freedom. The kings in Europe knew they did not have to invade us to control us. All they had to do was get their banking system established in America and they could stay in power. Europe's system depended on titles of nobility. Europe's system depended on titles of nobility. One set of rules for nobles and another set of rules for serfs. The nobles owned nearly everything and the serfs paid the nobles rent. The nobles acted much like American bankers today. Our founding fathers hated this class system, wishing to give everyone equal protection under the law and with gold and silver to prevent a bank takeover. One of the biggest secrets in America today is the original 13th Amendment, ratified and never repealed, but simply replaced during the confusion of the wars. Researchers David Dodge, Tom Dunn, and Brian March exposed this secret. A few years ago, I received their research showing 24 states and/or territories with 76 publications and an original constitution with the original 13th Amendment. Research shows it appears to have been ratified either once or twice on December 10th, 1812 and/or on March 12, 1819. In the War of 1812, the King of England ordered the records of Congress to be destroyed in a fire to destroy this 13th Amendment, hoping it would be replaced by another. The 13th Amendment would destroy the monarchs of the world, and the king was trying to keep his power. He knew if America was successful, his countrymen would follow America's example and demand the same, thereby forcing him out of power. Titles of Nobility by Gary Hunt exposes even more details. I recommend you read this material. Chapter 30. The original and lawful 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. Quote, if any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them, or either of them. End quote. In the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, no, quote, no title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. End quote. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. End quote. When one receives a license, it comes from the executive branch, except for attorneys' licenses. In some states, the state supreme licenses attorneys. I ask you, what authority under the Constitution and the three branches of government do the courts have to license anyone? How can a private organization govern themselves by giving a bar card to a member to practice in a court and prohibit the remaining population from practicing. This acts like a title of nobility. Can Congress delegate their authority and responsibility to a private organization? No. The court-licensed attorneys or bar card carrying attorneys control all three branches of government. The attorneys now interpret the law and the Constitution for all other Americans. Three branches of government exist to prevent one organization from taking over the nation, yet the attorneys control all three branches. It is believed, and research points to the fact, that attorneys, titles of nobilities, or title of nobility, comes from England, as does the Bar Association, which appears to be controlled or owned by banks. Attorneys take an oath, contract with the people to uphold the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution. It is required that attorneys and judges be U.S. citizens. If the original 13th Amendment is upheld, the attorneys and judges are not U.S. citizens and cannot put you in jail. Lawmakers with attorney licenses cannot pass laws. Even if they do, the nation is bankrupt and not sovereign, so it has no effect as law of a de jure government. Titles of nobility were used in Europe to designate a rank or dignity or privilege presented over others who otherwise would be of equal status. Our founding fathers hated this class system and brought it to an end. The powers in Europe thrived on this system. Keeping their families in power, they simply tried to implement this class system in America in order to extend their wealth and control. Our founding fathers envisioned America to be different, giving everyone equal protection. Today, you need an attorney to represent you in court and are not allowed counsel of your choice as the Constitution guarantees. The bar attorneys reinterpreted the Constitution to create a monopoly, forcing you to hire their members and to meet their agenda. If a bar attorney will not cooperate with the bar disbars him or her so that they cannot practice, nor even have a law challenged. Judges insist you hire an attorney, not counsel of your choice. One private organization controls court decisions affecting every citizen and the laws we live by. The Bar Association, the media, and the banks have far more control and a different agenda than most people realize. Do you see why government law enforcement threatened to kill me and plant evidence on me so they could silence me in jail? They have to hide the truth about the bank's operations. The original 13th Amendment and the Emergency War Powers and Trading with the Enemy Acts to remain in power and take your wealth and rights. If people understood the whole truth, they would have been voted out a long time ago. I need you to spread the word to make it happen and restore your freedoms. Join me in making America free again. Here is a history lesson about the original 13th Amendment and the War of 1812. In the mid-1700s, Mayor Rothschild, one of the most successful European bankers, was reported to have bragged, quote, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." End quote. Page 198, see bibliography number 12. He knew that if he controlled the banks, he controlled the lawmakers. Alexander Hamilton was appointed as Secretary of the Treasury in 1788 by George Washington. In 1790, Alexander Hamilton, a bank agent, submitted to Congress a proposal for the first bank of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, attempted to stop it without success. The investors of the bank were never revealed. It is believed Rothschild was an owner. The newspapers called it a great swindle. The bank was passed with a 20-year charter to allow the people time to discuss the bank and its merits and decide if they wanted to allow it to recharter by 1811. President James Monroe let the charter lapse. On January 24, 1811, the bank was voted out of business. Within 5 months, Britain was at war with America. In 1814, a British force arrived in Chesapeake Bay. Against all military logic, the British force first targeted the records of Congress and completely destroyed them instead of destroying the military fortifications. Why were these records so important? The king knew if the original 13th Amendment stored in the records of Congress survived, his reign was over. The king could not control America without his bank, nor if the original 13th Amendment succeeded. Today's police, attorneys, lawmakers, and judges are in the same situation that the king was in. When the king destroyed the 13th Amendment, he must have forgotten or did not realize that the state capitals had copies. When the banks own or control the media and publishing companies, they simply delete or true history. The judges, police, and lawmakers have been told and shown the evidence of the original 13th Amendment. If they allow it to exist, they would not only be removed from power, but how many people would want to try them for conspiracy or treason? There are many angry people. Why not give them amnesty if they come over to our side very quickly? Once they know the truth, we can document they were told. Then it shows their intent and it is up to the voters to decide the outcome. Money is a powerful means to persuade lawmakers to vote in the European banking system. Again, it happened. In 1816, a second European bank was granted a 20-year charter. Just as President Jefferson predicted, the bank infiltrated the economy and contracted the money supply, creating a depression in 1819 with a large number of bankruptcies and a debtor population. The banks simply repossessed the property and owned it without loaning 1 cent of other depositors' money. Again, the population woke up and Andrew Jackson ran for presidency with the campaigning to cancel the European banking system. Real Americans rallied behind Andrew Jackson and elected him to office. A second time, history repeated itself, and President Andrew Jackson ended the bank's charter, setting America free again from the nobles. And all we needed to do is repeat history again. First, by education so that the people will know the truth, and secondly, vote correctly to set themselves free. Chapter 31. Is the government bankrupt? The government in bankruptcy, according to Representative Trafficant of Ohio, on March 17, 1993, he said, quote, Mr. Speaker, we are here now in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government, end quote. To confirm this, look up House Joint Resolution 192 or HJR 192, Trading with the Enemy and Emergency War Powers. The bankruptcy took away the gold and silver. When you walk into a court, look for the gold fringe flag on a pole. It is a symbol of a military court, created through the bankruptcy. It would be impossible for the government to be bankrupt today if the government printed sovereign United States notes, interest-free, and if this were the only money allowed in the nation. Why did Representative Trafficant say that Congress was the official trustee of the government's bankruptcy? I recommend you use Black's Law Dictionary and look up the words bankruptcy and bankruptcy trustee. You will find a bankruptcy trustee can collect assets sue debtors, defend court actions, administer the estate, and set aside preferences of liabilities owed. I believe foreclosure victims lost properties because judges are acting like trustees, setting aside preferences, setting aside the unauthorized loan to the bank. The judge is acting like the trustee of the national bankruptcy, forcing us into this bankruptcy and forcing us to lose our property to the bankers. The bankers never could have done this if politicians upheld their oath of office to defend the US Constitution. Politicians have full knowledge of what they have done. This book is the proof that politicians and bankers knew and should have known all along. Can the judge set aside the debt the bank owes and force you to pay your debt to the bank by setting aside preferences? Examine the court foreclosure papers very carefully, and I am convinced you will find the answers. The government in bankruptcy is a corporation. By Congress refusing to print sovereign United States notes interest-free and instead printing Federal Reserve notes and allowing local banks to create bank liabilities used like money, the government and its citizens are forced into debt and bankruptcy. However, there is never enough money to pay the debt. The creditors own the nation's assets. When people tell me they own their house free and clear, I explain that under the bankruptcy, your house is collateral for the national debt. The banks control the country because they are the creditors. Congress is the trustee for the bank. The banks reversed the whole power structure by creating money. The banks want you to think that you have rights under the US Constitution. In bankruptcy, your rights by an agreement that was not disclosed to the American public or understood by the people are suspended under the Constitution. Your rights were exchanged for privileges, forcing you to have licenses. The police enforce the licenses. Do you see why the law claims that Congress cannot delegate responsibility to a private organization? If President Kennedy had lived and continued printing United States notes interest-free, giving us equal protection under the law, the banks could not be the creditors, bankrupting the nation and controlling us. The first thing President Johnson did as president was to stop printing those United States notes, replacing them with Federal Reserve notes. Some coin dealers now have the Kennedy dollars. President Kennedy was not going to escalate the war in Vietnam. In his place, President Johnson created huge war debts, thereby creating more taxes for the people and income for the banks. You lost your government and your rights in bankruptcy because most Americans do not understand money. Without sovereign United States money, we are forced to use unpaid bank liabilities as if they were money. If you sue the bank to pay the debt they owe you, and if the banks are forced to pay in substance and not allowed to create more bank debt, then they will have a major problem that will result in canceling your loans and the national debt. The media makes you think that America is a democracy. In the Pledge of Allegiance, you say, quote, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, end quote. It says, quote, republic, end quote, meaning constitutional, not democracy or mob rule. Government lawmakers, judges, and police take an oath, a contract with you to uphold the U.S. Constitution. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, against domestic violence, end quote. So ask yourself, do we have the republican form of government our founding fathers intended for us? If I told you I wanted to buy your car, gave you a check with no money behind it, and took your car, is that theft? Yes. What is the difference between that and using your promissory note to fund the bank loan check with the bank receiving the lien for free? In both cases, the victim lost money and is in debt for the loss. What is the difference if it is done on a national level? Who should own the country? We the people or the bankers? Who obtain the nation's assets for free? If you want to have your chicken stolen, hire a fox to guard the chicken house. You cannot blame him. That's what he's supposed to do. It's in his nature to be sly. I blame the one who hired him. The solution is simple. If Americans want out of their bank loans, all we have to do is expose the real bank agreement to enough Americans. If Americans want to double their wealth, and all they have to do is educate enough other Americans about the truth behind banking policies. The threat of our vote and public pressure exposing the media blackout will force the change. So Rear Admiral Chester Ward, a former member of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, for 16 years, warned about the bankers' intentions. In the book, Why a Bankrupt America, he is quoted as saying, the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty of the national independence of the United States. A second clique of international members in the CFR comprises the Wall Street international bankers and their key agents. Primarily, they want the world banking monopoly from whatever power ends up in control of global government, end quote. Page 27. See bibliography number 10. Many of our members of Congress belong to the CFR, along with members of media and other powerful positions. In 1957, U.S. Senator George Malone said, quote, I believe that if the people of this nation fully understood what Congress has done to them over the past 49 years, they would move on Washington. They would not wait for an election. It adds up to a preconceived plan to destroy the economic and social independence of the United States, end quote. I bid 9. They know the truth, but must remain silent to remain in power. Recall the words of Thomas Jefferson, who warned us about the banks. Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of a day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers' administrations, too plainly proves a deliberate systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. IBIT 13. The U.S. Constitution separated government into three branches. In bankruptcy, the banks become the creditors to all three branches and controls all three. The borrower becomes the servant to the lender. Founding father James Madison said, quote, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether in one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, appointed, or elected, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. End quote. Page 193, see bibliography number 2. Congressman Louis McFadden, former chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee, understood. We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Bank, hereinafter called the Fed. They are not government institutions. They are private monopolies which prey upon the people of the United States for the benefit of themselves and their foreign and domestic swindlers, rich and predatory moneylenders. See bibliography number 10, page 9. He continued, every effort has been made by the Federal Reserve Board to conceal its powers, but the truth is that the Federal Reserve Board has usurped the government of the United States. It controls everything here and it controls all our foreign relations. It makes and breaks governments at will. No man and no body of men is more entrenched in power than the arrogant credit monopoly which operates the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Bank. These evildoers have robbed this country of more than enough money to pay the national debt. What the government has permitted the Federal Reserve Banks to steal from the people should now be restored to the people. The Federal Reserve Act should be repealed, and the Federal Reserve Banks, having violated their charters, should be liquidated immediately. Faithless government officers who have violated their oaths should be impeached and brought to trial. Page 170 to 174, see bibliography number 12. He was there when the bankruptcy occurred. If anyone should know, he should. The media blackout just kept you from learning the whole truth. They now think you will fall for the balanced budget propaganda. Anyone listening to the lies will come up with the wrong solution. Now you know better, and we also have a solution. The politicians have made it clear who they represent. Congressman McFadden wanted to correct the problem along with other congressmen, but they could not because they were not able to inform enough Americans. The media made sure there was a media blackout. If enough Americans find out the whole truth and help our leaders uphold their oath of office, we will be debt free and you will be doubling your wealth. Knowledge is power. If too many people find out the truth, the lies will end and everyone will want out of their debt. As a plaintiff, if you expose the bankruptcy, the judge may throw out the case. The judge does not want the bankruptcy exposed. Is the court a bankruptcy court administering the bankruptcy? If you sue, you have to decide what court to sue in and if the bankruptcy makes a difference. If you win, it may be because the judge does not want the truth exposed. The judge does not want the bright spotlight on the banker's activities. Wisely use this spotlight of truth to win. Chapter 32. Insolvency. If the bank auditor knows that the bank did not fulfill the bank loan agreement or that the bank is insolvent, this must be disclosed in the audit opinion or a dirty opinion must be given. A dirty opinion means the bank is insolvent or involved in a fraud and that they never legally own the promissory note. The users of the bank financial system need to know the truth so that they can make informed investment decisions. Is the bank insolvent? To determine this, we need to know what insolvent means. The Dictionary of Banking Terms defines insolvency as, quote, the inability to pay debts as they mature, end quote. It further explains insolvency as not being able to pay debts. A bank is considered insolvent if the ratio of liabilities to assets is zero or near zero. If assets over liabilities is zero, more liabilities than quality assets available to pay the liabilities, the bank is considered insolvent. If the bank records the promissory note as a loan from the alleged borrower to the bank, and if the bank repays the loan in, quote, its equivalent in kind, quote, meaning the principal and interest, the bank never has the money to repay the loan, making the bank insolvent. If it is insolvent, the bank never has actual cash value to loan to the borrower to obtain the promissory note. From this book, you have learned one thing. If everyone went to the bank and closed out their checking accounts, cut up their credit cards, and only used cash, the banks would have to pay all the debt they owe borrowers. The government would have to print United States notes, cash, interest-free, or it would be obvious to everyone that the leaders of this nation represent the banking interests. If the bank does not print new Federal Reserve notes, can the bank convert its assets to pay all the bank debt? No. There is not enough cash to pay the bank debt. They would, by definition, be insolvent because they are unable to convert assets into cash to meet financial obligations. Are the banks insolvent? Did they loan you cash or give you a liability owing you cash? If they are insolvent, how can they have loaned you cash? If you study the words insolvency and bankruptcy, you will find that the bank can never be insolvent because they never intended to pay the bank liabilities. They only trade the bank liabilities from one checking account to another by check. You can argue that if everyone demanded the bank pay the bank debt owed for the promissory notes by demanding cash, the bank is insolvent unless they create more debt by printing more Federal Reserve notes. The only alternative is having the government print cash interest-free by printing United States notes. If the bank is not insolvent because they never intended to pay the bank debt, it proves that the bank never loaned money and never intended to loan you actual cash value to obtain your promissory note. If they admit that they are insolvent, they could not make the loan. If they claim they are not insolvent, they must prove that they obtained the promissory note for free. If they claim they are not insolvent, they must prove that they obtained the promissory note for free. Chapter 33. What creates inflation? Increasing the money supply beyond the goods and services available causes inflation. We've all heard stories of a loaf of bread costing 10 cents or a fancy house costing 35,000 years ago. Why did the price go up? It is best illustrated in this example. If the nation had only 100 loaves of bread, the obvious price of the bread is $1. If the money supply is increased to 200 and only 100 loaves of bread are available, the price of a loaf is increased to $2. The bread maker gets smart and produces an extra 100 loaves, creating a total of 200 loaves, and the price of a loaf drops to $1. As long as you add production, as you add dollars, to the money supply, there may be little, if any, inflation. I'm going to read that again. What creates inflation? Increasing the money supply beyond the goods and services available causes inflation. We've all heard stories of a loaf of bread costing 10 cents or a fancy house costing 35,000 years ago. Why did the price go up? It is best illustrated in this example. If the nation had only 100 loaves of bread, the obvious price of the bread is $1. If the money supply increased to 200 cash and only 100 loaves of bread are available, the price of a loaf is increased to $2. The bread maker gets smart and produces an extra 100 loaves, creating a total of 200 loaves, and the price of a loaf drops to $1. As long as you add production, as you add dollars to the money supply, there may be little, if any, inflation. 34. What causes recessions and depressions? Decreasing the money supply causes recessions and depressions. There is no difference between a recession and a depression except for the amount of money in circulation. If the U.S. constitutional banking system or founding fathers created was followed, there would be no recession nor depressions in America. Congress would be sure that there was an adequate supply of money and not allow one group to manipulate the money supply and profit from debauching it. It is the bank's policy to create recessions in order to increase their profits. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago publication Modern Money Mechanics, page 6, gives the bankers instructions on how to create a bank-induced recession or depression. Did the banks create the 1929 Great Depression? Congressman Louis McFadden chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency from 1920 to 1931, accused the Federal Bank for creating the crash. Quote, "It was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all." End quote. See bibliography number 8, page 191. Congressman Charles Lindbergh, the famous flyer's father, wrote this about the Federal Reserve Bank shortly after it was created. Quote, "Depressions will be scientifically created." End quote. See bibliography number 2, page 124. Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." End quote. See bibliography number 12, page 247. These three famous people knew how the banks created depressions using the European banking system. They wanted the nation to use only the US constitutional banking system. Yet we did not listen. Today, our plan is to warn the whole nation so the banks cannot crash the economy, creating another depression and forcing us into a cashless society. How did the banks create the Great Depression? From 1923 to 1929, through alleged loans, the banks increased the money supply by 62%. Easy money created a business boom. Banks created money and loaned it to borrowers wishing to buy stock. You could buy 1,000 cash in stock for 100 cash down and finance the other 900 cash with a 24-hour call loan from the bank. The stock prices went up and up, fueled by the money the banks created and loaned out to buy stock. The insiders sold their stock at a great profit and bought government bonds or held the cash, waiting for the crash. In unison, the banks called the 24-hour broker call loans due. The non-bankers were forced to sell their stock to pay for the loans. Everyone sold and the crash began. Within a few weeks, $3 billion of wealth vanished. The wealth of one of the insiders, Joseph P. Kennedy, grew from $4 million in 1929 to $100 million by 1935. It is no secret. Sell your stock on the high side and buy on the low side. After the crash, cash was scarce. Those who were on the inside, those who sold their stock before the crash and held cash, now bought companies for 10 cents on the dollar. Great fortunes were made at the misery of others. Between 1929 to 1933, the Federal Reserve Bank reduced the money supply by 33%, thereby creating the Great Depression. It is wicked enough that the bank never risks or invests 1 cent of legal tender or other depositors' money and loans you your own money at interest. It is even more sinister when the banks control the gambling odds and force you to lose at their whim, taking all your property for their added profit. The bank receives your promissory note and lien for free, receives your monthly loan payments for free, and then forecloses and receives the equity on your home or farm for free. The bank policy is to create recessions to force a percentage of people to default, putting you out on the street. All the European banking system does is shift the wealth from you to the bank. By buying foreclosed properties, judges, police, and lawmakers can make a fortune. Today, the same situation exists as did just before the Great Depression. Will we learn our lesson and save the nation by exposing the bankers? All right. We're going to end on that question there. Will we learn our lesson and save the nation by exposing the bankers? I want to thank you guys for your time and patience. Remember, strength in body, powers in mind. Stay up.